The wind cut through his thin jacket like a knife as he pushed open the glass door of the diner. Inside, the warmth hit him immediately, along with the smell of fresh coffee and something frying on the griddle. His stomach twisted painfully. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a real meal. 2 days ago, 3? Time had started blurring together somewhere around the Indiana border. David Chen stood just inside the doorway for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the light. The place was small, maybe a dozen tables with red vinyl booths along the windows and a long counter with spinning stools. A few locals sat scattered around, nursing their evening coffee and picking at slices of pie. Nobody looked up when he walked in. That was fine with him. He didn't want attention. He made his way to the counter slowly, aware of how he must look. His jeans were dusty from sleeping in his car. His sneakers had a hole forming near the left toe. The jacket he wore had been nice once, back when he had a different life, but now it just looked sad and worn out. He slid onto a stool at the far end of the counter, away from the other customers. A woman appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was somewhere in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and the kind of face that had seen plenty of hard years but hadn't let them make her mean. Her name tag said Ruth. "What can I get you, honey?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight southern accent that didn't quite match the Michigan town they were in. People moved around, he figured. Everyone had their stories. David pulled out his wallet and opened it slowly, pretending to look at something while he counted. $6.32. That was it. That was all that stood between him and complete emptiness. His credit cards were maxed out. His bank account had been overdrawn for weeks. The car was running on fumes. "Just coffee, please," he said quietly. "And maybe, do you have any bread?" Toast would be fine. Ruth looked at him for a long moment, not with pity exactly, more like recognition. Like she'd seen this before, known people in this exact spot. She poured the coffee without a word and set it in front of him, the steam rising in the cool air of the diner. "You passing through?" she asked, not unkindly. "Yes, ma'am," David said. The coffee was hot and strong, and he wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. He'd been cold for so long. "Where you headed?" He didn't have a good answer for that. East, he supposed. Away from California, away from the university, away from the life that had fallen apart. "Not sure yet," he said. Ruth nodded like this made perfect sense. She disappeared into the kitchen and came back with 2 slices of toast, buttered and cut diagonally. She set them down in front of him without comment. David started to reach for his wallet, but she waved him off. "On the house," she said. Something in his chest tightened. Charity. He'd never been on this end of it before. 2 years ago, he'd been presenting at conferences. He'd had research grants. He'd been somebody. Now he was the guy getting free toast at a roadside diner. "Actually," he said, the words coming out before he'd fully thought them through, "I was wondering if you might have any work. Just for today. I can wash dishes, take out trash, whatever you need. I'm not looking for a handout. I'd rather earn a meal if that's all right." Ruth studied him again with those sharp, knowing eyes. Then she smiled slightly. "Storage room's been needing organization for about 6 months. Got boxes piled up back there, supplies all mixed together. If you want to sort through that mess, I'll feed you properly. Deal?" "Deal," David said, relief flooding through him. The storage room was exactly as advertised. A mess. Boxes of napkins mixed with cleaning supplies, mixed with old menus, mixed with broken appliances that probably should have been thrown out years ago. David rolled up his sleeves and got to work. It felt good, honestly. Physical work. Simple work. Work where you could see the progress you were making. Not like his research had been, all theoretical and abstract and never quite finished. He'd been at it for maybe an hour when he heard the commotion from the front. Raised voices. The clatter of something falling. He stuck his head out of the storage room to see what was happening. The diner had filled up. It was dinner rush now, apparently. Every table was full, and there was a small crowd waiting by the door. Ruth was behind the counter, staring at a computer screen with a look of pure frustration. Another woman, younger, maybe in her 30s, was trying to help her, but they both looked lost. "It just froze," Ruth was saying to no one in particular. "Right in the middle of taking an order. Now I can't get it to do anything." "Did you try restarting it?" the other woman asked. 3 times, nothing. It won't even turn off properly." A man at the counter, clearly hungry and impatient, spoke up. "How long is this going to take?" I've been waiting 15 minutes just to order. I know, Ruth said, her usual calm starting to crack. I'm sorry. The whole system's down. I can't print tickets to the kitchen, can't process payments, can't do anything. David watched for another moment. Ruth was now on the phone, probably calling a repair service. He could hear her frustration even from across the room. Tomorrow afternoon? No, I need someone now. This is my dinner rush. I'm losing customers. A pause. $200 just for the emergency call-out? Plus the actual repair? She hung up and pressed her palms against her eyes. The diner was starting to empty. People were getting up, leaving cash on tables for coffee they'd already had, saying they'd come back another time. David walked over slowly. Excuse me, he said quietly. Ruth looked up. I don't want to overstep, but I know a little about computers. Would you mind if I took a look? Ruth stared at him. The younger woman, who turned out to be Ruth's daughter, looked skeptical. No offense, the daughter said, but this is a specialized point-of-sale system. It's not like a regular computer. I understand, David said, but what do you have to lose? If I can't fix it, you're not any worse off than you are now. And if I can... He shrugged. Ruth looked at the empty tables, at the remaining customers who were gathering their things to leave, at the computer screen still frozen on a half-completed order. Then she stepped aside. Have at it, she said. David pulled up a stool and sat down in front of the machine. He pressed a few keys, watching carefully for any response. The daughter hovered nearby, arms crossed. Ruth had gone to apologize to the remaining customers, promising free desserts if they'd be patient just a little longer. David's fingers moved across the keyboard with muscle memory he'd thought he'd lost. It had been over a year since he'd worked on anything more technical than his car's oil change. But this was familiar territory. Code was code. Systems were systems. And he'd spent years learning how to make them work. David's eyes scanned the frozen screen. Order number 47, half entered. A cheeseburger, fries, and a drink. The cursor blinked in the middle of the word pickles and nothing else moved. He pressed the escape key. Nothing. Control-Alt-Delete, nothing. The computer was locked up tight, see? Ruth's daughter said from behind him. It's completely dead. We need a professional. Give me a minute, David said softly. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was listening. There was a faint whirring sound coming from the tower under the counter. The fan was running. That meant the machine had power. It wasn't dead. It was just stuck. He reached down and felt the side of the computer tower. Hot. Really hot. That was the first clue. He glanced at the wall outlet where it was plugged in. Then at the power strip. 6 things plugged into it. The register, the computer, a lamp, a phone charger. 2 other devices he couldn't identify in the tangle of cords. Do you have a screwdriver? He asked. Ruth appeared beside him. What kind? Phillips head. Small one if you have it. She disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a small toolkit, the kind you buy at a hardware store for basic household repairs. David took it and set it on the counter. Then he unplugged the computer tower and carefully moved it up onto the counter space beside the register. Wait, what are you doing? The daughter asked, alarm in her voice. You're going to void the warranty. I'm guessing this machine is at least 5 years old, David said, looking at the model number on the back. Warranty's long gone, and if we don't get it running in the next 10 minutes, you're going to lose the rest of your dinner crowd. Ruth put a hand on her daughter's arm. Let him try, Beth. David removed the screws from the side panel and set them carefully aside. When he lifted the panel off, both women leaned in to look. Inside was a mess. Dust covered everything. The fan blades were caked with lint. The circuit boards had a fine gray coating of grime. When was this last cleaned? David asked. Ruth and Beth looked at each other. Cleaned? Beth said. It's a computer. You're supposed to clean them. David almost smiled. Almost. Heat is a computer's worst enemy. All this dust acts like a blanket. The components overheat and the system shuts down to protect itself. That's probably what happened here. He looked around the diner. You have any compressed air? Like for dusting? I have a can in my car, a voice said. David turned. An older man, probably in his 70s, was standing behind them. He'd been sitting at the counter the whole time, watching. I use it for my camera equipment. Be right back. He returned a minute later with a blue and white can. David took it and carefully began blowing out the dust. Clouds of gray powder puffed out of the computer. He worked methodically, getting into every corner, every crevice. The fan blades, the heat sinks, the memory cards. Years of accumulated dust drifted out onto the counter. "Good Lord," Ruth said. "I had no idea." When David finished with the compressed air, he peered closer at the power supply. There, near the connection point, he could see it. Corrosion, green and white buildup on the contacts. He grabbed a napkin from the dispenser and rubbed it gently, cleaning away what he could. "This is your real problem," he said, pointing. "See this? The power connection is corroded. It's not getting consistent electricity. The computer keeps trying to run, but it's getting power surges and drops. That's why it freezes. Can you fix it?" Ruth asked. David sat back and thought. He needed a replacement power supply, really. But that would mean ordering a part, waiting for delivery, paying for it. None of those options helped Ruth right now. He looked at the power strip again, at all those devices plugged in. "Unplug everything from that power strip except the computer," he said. "The register, too. Move it to a different outlet if you can." Beth started unplugging things. Ruth found an extension cord and moved the register to an outlet across the room. David cleaned the power connections as best he could with the napkin and a bit of rubbing alcohol Beth brought from the first aid kit. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it might work. Might. He reconnected everything, making sure each connection was firm. Then he replaced the side panel and screwed it back on. His hands were steady. This was the first time in months that he'd felt like himself. Like the person he used to be. "Okay," he said. Moment of truth. He pressed the power button. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the fan whirred to life, louder than before now that it was clean. The screen flickered. Everyone held their breath. A logo appeared, then a loading screen, then finally the login prompt. Beth let out a little gasp. "It's working. Type in your password," David said, standing up so she could take the seat. She did. The system loaded. Slower than a new computer would, but it loaded. The frozen order was gone, cleared by the restart. But the system was functional. Beth pulled up a new order screen and it responded immediately. "I don't believe it," she said, clicking through screens rapidly. "It's working. It's actually working." The old man with the compressed air started clapping. Then another customer joined in. Soon the whole diner was applauding. David felt his face get hot. He wasn't used to this kind of attention anymore. For the past year, he'd been invisible, just another person struggling to get by. Now everyone was looking at him. "How much do I owe you?" Ruth asked, reaching for the register. "Nothing," David said quickly. "We had a deal. I organize your storage room, you feed me. This was just extra." "Absolutely not," Ruth said firmly. "You just saved me hundreds of dollars and kept me from losing a night's worth of business." "Beth, ring up a full dinner. And I mean full. Soup, entree, dessert, the works." David wanted to argue, but his stomach betrayed him with a loud growl that made several people laugh. Ruth pointed at a booth. "Sit, I'm making you a proper meal, and you're not leaving until you eat every bite." He sat. The diner returned to normal. Customers placing orders, the kitchen coming back to life with the sound of sizzling and clattering. Beth worked the computer system smoothly now, orders flowing through like nothing had happened. Ruth came out of the kitchen herself carrying a steaming bowl of soup. She set it down in front of David along with a basket of fresh rolls. "Homemade vegetable beef," she said. "Family recipe. While you're eating that, I'm working on your steak." "That's really too much," David protested weakly. "Honey, I've been running this diner for 32 years, Ruth said. "I know hungry when I see it, and I know skill when I see it too. What you just did, that wasn't luck. You knew exactly what you were doing. So eat up, and when you're done, maybe you can tell me what a man with your talents is doing passing through my little town looking for work." She walked away before he could answer. David looked down at the soup. Steam rose from it in soft curls. The smell was incredible. He picked up the spoon and took a bite. It was the best thing he'd tasted in months, maybe years. As he ate, he became aware that people were watching him. Not staring, but glancing over. The old man with the camera came over to his booth. "That was impressive," he said. "My daughter's been trying to get me to buy a new laptop. Says mine is too old. Maybe you could take a look at it? It's been running slow." Before David could answer, a woman from another table called over. "My son's computer won't connect to the internet anymore. The cable company says nothing's wrong on their end. You think you could figure it out?" A younger guy, maybe 25, stood up from the counter. "The garage where I work, our diagnostic computer keeps glitching. Boss is talking about buying a new one. but we can't really afford it. If you're going to be in town, David set down his spoon and looked around the diner. All these people looking at him with hope and expectation. A week ago, he would have said no. Would have made an excuse and left town as soon as possible. But sitting here with hot soup in front of him and a steak on the way, in a warm diner full of people who just watched him solve a problem, something shifted inside him. I might be able to help, he heard himself say. I'm not making any promises, but I can take a look. Ruth brought out his steak. Medium rare, just like she'd asked without asking. A loaded baked potato on the side. Green beans that actually looked fresh. She set it down with a smile that said she'd been listening to everything. Sounds like you might be staying in town a little longer than you planned, she said. David spent that night in his car behind the diner. Ruth had offered to pay for a motel room, but he'd declined. He was used to the car by now. The back seat folded down just enough that he could stretch out almost fully. He had a sleeping bag and a pillow. It wasn't comfortable, but it was his, the last piece of independence he had left. In the morning, Ruth found him washing his face in the diner's bathroom. She didn't say anything about where he'd slept, but she made him a full breakfast without asking. Eggs, bacon, hash browns, and coffee that could wake the dead. That old man from yesterday, George, she said, refilling his coffee cup. He'll be by around 10 with his laptop. And Helen? The woman asking about her son's computer. She said she'd drop it off at lunch. I hope that's all right. I told them you'd take a look. David swallowed a bite of eggs. You didn't have to do that. I know, Ruth said with a small smile. But I wanted to. This town could use someone like you, and you look like you could use a place to land for a little while, just until you figure things out. She was right, though David didn't want to admit it. He'd been driving aimlessly for weeks, running from his old life without having any destination in mind. Maybe stopping for a few days wouldn't hurt. George showed up right at 10, laptop in hand. It was old, probably 7 or 8 years, but well cared for. The screen was clean. No scratches. My daughter bought me a new one for Christmas, George explained as David opened it. But I like this one. I know where everything is. The new one confuses me, David smiled. He understood that feeling. Let's see what we can do. The laptop took 3 minutes just to boot up. When it finally loaded, David could see the problem immediately. The hard drive was nearly full. Years of photos, documents, downloaded files nobody remembered downloading, and about 15 different programs trying to run its startup, all fighting for resources. You take a lot of photos, David said, scrolling through folders of images. Grandchildren, family gatherings, sunsets, birds at a feeder. My hobby, George said proudly. Got over 10,000 photos on there. That's not too many, is it? It was too many for this old laptop, but David didn't say that. Instead, he pulled a small external hard drive from his backpack. He'd bought it years ago and barely used it. Tell you what, let me transfer all your photos to this. Then they'll be safe and we can free up space on your computer. You'll be able to access them whenever you want, but they won't slow down your machine. George watched as David worked, asking questions about what he was doing. David explained in simple terms, avoiding the technical jargon. He cleaned up the startup programs, ran a disk cleanup, defragmented the hard drive. Basic maintenance that made a huge difference. By noon, the laptop was running faster than it had in years. How much? George asked, reaching for his wallet. David thought about the external hard drive. It had cost him $40 once. He could use $40 now. But looking at George's grateful face, at the way he was carefully holding his laptop like it was something precious, David couldn't do it. 20 for the hard drive, he said. The labor's free. Just bring me some of your photos sometime. Ruth says you're quite the photographer. George's eyes got misty. He pressed 2 20s into David's hand despite his protests and left saying he'd be back with prints. Helen's son's computer was next. Desktop model, gaming setup. The problem was the Wi-Fi adapter. It had failed. A replacement part cost $12 online, but would take days to ship. David found an old USB Wi-Fi adapter in his car, left over from another life. He installed it, configured it, and had the kid back online in 20 minutes. Word spread fast in a small town. By the end of the week, David had worked on 8 different computers. A teacher's laptop that wouldn't charge. A small business owner's printer that had stopped communicating with his computer. An elderly couple's tablet that they'd accidentally locked themselves out of. He worked out of the diner, setting up in an empty booth in the afternoons when the lunch rush ended. Ruth refused to let him pay for his meals. You're bringing in customers, she said, and it was true. People would come in to drop off their devices, then stay for coffee and pie while they waited. David started sleeping in a small room above the diner's storage area. Ruth had shown it to him on day 3, acting like she'd just remembered it existed. "Nobody's used it in years," she said. "Just has an old cot and a dresser. But it's warm and dry. Better than your car." He'd accepted because she was right, and because his car's heater had started making a concerning rattling sound. On Saturday, a woman in her 40s came into the diner. She looked different from the usual customers, more polished. She wore a blazer and carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from education and professional success. Her name was Catherine Wong, and she was the principal at the local high school. "I heard you've been working miracles with computers," she said, sliding into the booth across from David. He was eating lunch, a Reuben sandwich that Ruth insisted was her specialty. "Not miracles," David said. "Just basic repairs. George Patterson showed me his laptop. He said you had it running like new in less than 2 hours. The computer shop in the next town over told him it wasn't worth fixing." David shrugged. "It just needed some cleaning up. Old machines can run fine if you maintain them properly." Catherine leaned forward. "I have a problem." "Well, the school has a problem. Our computer lab is basically a museum of obsolete technology. 20 machines, all of them at least 15 years old. Half of them don't work at all. The district has no budget for replacements. We've applied for grants, but there are 30 schools in the district, and we're the smallest. I'm not sure I can help with that," David said slowly. "If the hardware is too old, there's only so much you can do. I'm not asking for magic. I'm asking for your expertise. If you could just look at them, see if any are salvageable. I'd pay you, of course. The school doesn't have much, but I have some discretionary funds." David thought about it. He'd been in town for almost a week now. He'd made a few $100s doing odd jobs. His car needed that heater fixed. He needed to buy some clothes. His were getting worn from constant wearing. But something about the way Catherine described the problem interested him. "A challenge. A real challenge, not just routine maintenance. I'll take a look," he said. "No promises." The computer lab was worse than he expected. Ancient desktop towers covered in dust, monitors with dead pixels, tangled cables that hadn't been organized in years. Most of the machines wouldn't even turn on. The ones that did were running operating systems so old they were security risks. But as David walked through the room checking each machine, his mind started working differently. Not just diagnosing problems, but seeing possibilities. 3 of the computers had good processors and adequate RAM. 4 others had working hard drives. The monitors were mostly functional. There were parts here, enough parts to potentially build something useful. "What's your internet connection like?" he asked Catherine. "Decent? We upgraded the bandwidth 2 years ago. That much the district did approve." David sat down at one of the desks, his mind racing. What if we didn't try to fix all 20 machines? What if we consolidated the working parts and built 10 solid computers instead? Then we set them up on a network, strip them down to the essentials, install a lightweight operating system. "Would that work?" Catherine asked. "It might. I'd need to spend some real time on it. Couple of weeks probably, and I'd need to order a few parts. Nothing expensive, but some things I can't salvage." Catherine pulled out a notebook and started writing. "Make me a list of what you need. I'll find the money somewhere, even if I have to fundraise from parents." That night, David sat in his small room above the diner with his laptop open. He hadn't used it much lately. It reminded him too much of his old life. But now he opened up his old files, his research notes, the partial dissertation he'd never finished. His research had been about efficient computing in resource-limited environments, about making technology work for communities that couldn't afford the latest and greatest. He'd been so focused on the theory, on getting published, on impressing his advisors. He'd never actually applied it to a real situation. Here was a real situation. A school that needed help. Kids who deserved access to technology but couldn't get it. It wasn't prestigious. Nobody would publish a paper about fixing up old computers in a small-town school. But it mattered. Maybe it mattered more than his dissertation ever had. Ruth knocked on his door around 9. "Brought you some leftover pot roast," she said, handing him a covered plate. "You planning on staying a while?" David looked at his laptop screen, at the sketches he'd been making for the school's computer lab. "Maybe," he said. "There's something here I need to finish." Ruth smiled knowingly. "Good, this town could use you. And I think you could use this town too." David spent 2 weeks transforming the school's computer lab. He arrived every morning at 7 before the students showed up, and often stayed past dark. The work was meticulous. He disassembled every machine, testing each component, sorting parts into piles of working, repairable, and beyond saving. The teachers started noticing him. They'd peek in during their planning periods, watching this stranger hunched over circuit boards and tangled wires. Some brought him coffee. Others asked questions. What was he doing? Would it really work? How did he know so much about computers? David kept his answers short. He'd learned some things in college, picked up more along the way. Nothing special. Just basic knowledge and patience, but it was more than basic knowledge, and anyone who watched him work could see it. The way his hands moved with absolute confidence, the way he could look at a motherboard and immediately identify the failed capacitor, the way he solved problems that seemed impossible to everyone else. By the end of the first week, he had 10 functional computers built from the scraps of 20 broken ones. But he didn't stop there. He installed a lightweight Linux distribution that ran smoothly on the old hardware. He configured them to work as thin clients sharing resources across the network. He set up educational software that teachers could use for math, science, reading, and writing. The students started trickling in during the second week. Catherine had spread the word that the lab would be reopening soon, and kids were curious. They'd come to the doorway and watch David work, whispering to each other. A girl, maybe 14, finally worked up the courage to speak to him. Is it true you're fixing all these computers for free? David looked up from the cable he was organizing. The school's paying me a little. But yeah, mostly I'm just trying to help. Why? Another student asked. I mean, no offense, but you could probably make way more money doing something else. It was a good question. One David had been asking himself. Sometimes helping is more important than making money, he said finally. It sounded cheesy when he said it out loud, but it was true. The students started coming by after school. At first they just watched, but gradually they started asking if they could help. David showed them how to organize cables, how to test connections, how to identify different components. They were fascinated by the inside of computers, by how everything fit together. One boy, a quiet kid named Tommy, showed particular interest. He'd stay later than the others, asking detailed questions about how the network functioned, why David had chosen certain configurations. His questions were smart. Really smart? You thinking about studying computer science? David asked him one evening. Tommy shrugged. Maybe, I'd like to, but my dad says there's no money in it. Says I should learn a trade, plumbing or electrical work. David felt something twist in his chest. How many times had he heard that kind of thinking? How many talented kids were steered away from their interest because of misconceptions? There's plenty of money in computer science, he said carefully. But more importantly, if you're good at it and you enjoy it, that matters. The world needs people who can solve technical problems. Were you good at it? Tommy asked. In school, I mean? David paused, his hand stilling on the keyboard in front of him. Yeah, he said quietly. I was good at it. So what happened? Why are you here fixing old computers in our school instead of working for some big tech company? The question hung in the air. David could have deflected it, changed the subject, given some vague answer. But looking at Tommy's curious, open face, he found he didn't want to lie. Life got complicated, he said. I had to make some choices, and I walked away from things I shouldn't have walked away from. Now I'm trying to figure out how to find my way back. Tommy nodded like he understood, even though he probably didn't. Not really. He was 14. His whole life was still ahead of him. On a Thursday evening, nearly 3 weeks after David had started the project, Catherine came into the lab and found him doing something unexpected. He wasn't working on the computers. He was sitting at one of the newly functioning machines, typing rapidly, surrounded by papers covered in equations and diagrams. What's all this? She asked, genuinely curious. David quickly minimized the window on the screen, but not before Catherine caught a glimpse of complex formulas and what looked like academic writing. Nothing important, just something I was working on. But Catherine had spent 20 years in education. She knew evasion when she heard it. She pulled up a chair and sat down beside him. David, I've been watching you for 3 weeks. You're not just some guy who knows how to fix computers. The way you think, the way you problem solve, the way you talk about network architecture and resource optimization, that's not self-taught knowledge. That's advanced education. Graduate level, if I had to guess. David's jaw tightened. He didn't say anything. I'm not trying to pry into your business, Catherine continued gently. Your past is your own. But I want you to know that whatever brought you here, whatever you're running from or trying to forget, you don't have to hide who you are. Not in this school. Not with me. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the computers and the distant noise of the janitor cleaning classrooms down the hall. Then David let out a long breath. I was a doctoral candidate, he said quietly. Computer engineering at Stanford. I was 3 months away from defending my dissertation when my mother got sick. Stage 4 cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months. I took a leave of absence to take care of her. Catherine listened without interrupting. She lasted 8 months. By the time she died, I'd burned through my savings, maxed out my credit cards, fallen behind on everything. I tried to go back to school, but I couldn't focus. My advisor was understanding at first, but eventually, the department needed my teaching position for someone else. My funding dried up. I just kept thinking I'd get back to it, finish my research, but months turned into a year and I couldn't seem to make myself do it. What was your research about? Catherine asked. David pulled up the window he'd minimized. The screen filled with dense text, mathematical models, network diagrams. Optimizing digital infrastructure for rural and underserved communities. How to make robust, efficient computer networks using limited resources. How to bring quality technology access to places that can't afford cutting-edge equipment. Catherine stared at the screen, then at the computer lab around them. You mean like what you just did here? Yeah, David said with a slight sad smile. Exactly like what I did here. I spent 3 years developing theoretical models for this exact kind of problem, writing papers about it, presenting at conferences, but I never actually applied it anywhere. It was all just theory, just academic exercise, and now I've actually done it. Built a functioning computer lab from garbage that everyone else had written off, set up a network that runs efficiently on ancient hardware, proved that my theories actually work in the real world. He laughed, but it sounded bitter. And nobody will ever know. There's no paper to publish, no degree to earn. It's just a small school in a small town that nobody's ever heard of. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Can I see your dissertation? What you'd completed before you stopped. David hesitated. He hadn't shown his work to anyone in over a year. The idea of letting someone read his unfinished research made him feel exposed, vulnerable. But something about Catherine's steady, non-judgmental presence made him trust her. He pulled up another file. It's not finished. There are gaps, sections I never completed, analysis I never ran. Catherine began reading, scrolling slowly through the document. Her expression changed as she read from curious to surprised to something that looked like excitement. David, this is extraordinary. This isn't just good research. This is important research. This could help thousands of schools, community centers, libraries, and could have, David corrected. Past tense. I gave up on it. Why? The question was simple, but the answer was complicated.
Why had he given up?
He told himself it was because of money, because of grief, because he couldn't face going back. But sitting here now, in this computer lab that proved his theories worked, he wondered if the real reason was fear. Fear that he wasn't good enough. Fear that his work wouldn't matter. Fear of failing. I don't know, he admitted. I think I just forgot why it mattered. Catherine stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. My students will use these computers every day, she said. They'll learn on them, create on them, discover things about themselves and the world. Tommy? That kid who's been helping you, he told me yesterday that he wants to study computer science now. He said you inspired him. She turned back to face David. Your work matters. It mattered when it was theoretical, and it matters even more now that you've proven it works. The only question is whether you're going to pick it back up and finish what you started. David looked at the computer screen, at the incomplete dissertation that had haunted him for a year. Then he looked around the lab at the computers he'd brought back to life, at the potential he'd created for students who desperately needed it. I don't know if I can, he said honestly. I think you can, Catherine said. But more importantly, I think you need to. Not for a degree or recognition. For yourself. To prove that you didn't give up. That all the struggle and sacrifice meant something. After she left, David sat alone in the computer lab for a long time. The building was quiet now, empty except for him. He opened his dissertation file and started reading from the beginning. It was good work, better than he'd remembered, and for the first time in a year, he felt the familiar pull of curiosity, the desire to solve the puzzle, to finish what he'd started. He began to type. Catherine made a phone call that night. She sat in her home office looking at David's dissertation on her laptop screen and dialed a number she hadn't used in 15 years. It rang 4 times before someone answered. "This is Dr. Patricia Hayes." "Patricia, it's Catherine Wong from college. I know it's been forever." There was a pause, then a warm laugh. "Catherine, my goodness, it must be 15 years? How are you?" They caught up briefly. Catherine was a high school principal now. Patricia headed the computer science department at the state university, an hour's drive away. They talked about families, careers, the passage of time. Then Catherine got to the point. "I need you to look at something, a dissertation, unfinished, but the work that's there is remarkable. It's about optimizing technology infrastructure for underserved communities." "Send it over," Patricia said. "Though I have to warn you, I'm pretty backed up with student papers right now." "This isn't a student." "Well, he was. He's someone I think you need to meet." Catherine sent the file that night. Patricia called her back at 7 the next morning. "Where did you find this person?" Patricia's voice was different now, intense, focused. "This research is exactly what the National Science Foundation has been looking for. We've had grants sitting unused because nobody's proposed viable solutions for rural technology access. This could be groundbreaking." "He's been living in his car," Catherine said quietly, "working odd jobs. He gave up on finishing his degree over a year ago." "Are you kidding me?" "Catherine, talent like this doesn't just walk away." "What happened?" Catherine told her what she knew. About David's mother, the medical bills, the grief, the slow collapse of everything he'd built. Patricia listened without interrupting. "I want to meet him," Patricia said when Catherine finished. "Can you arrange that?" David was suspicious when Catherine asked him to have coffee with a friend of hers. He'd been working on his dissertation every night after finishing at the school, but he still wasn't ready to share it with anyone. Especially not some professor from a university. "She's not going to judge you," Catherine promised. "Just talk to her, please, as a favor to me." They met at Ruth's diner naturally. Patricia arrived early, ordering coffee and sitting in a booth by the window. When David walked in, she recognized him immediately from Catherine's description. Young, early 30s, wearing clean but worn clothes. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Smart eyes, tired but alert and observant. "David Chen," she said, standing up. "I'm Patricia Hayes. Thank you for meeting me." They shook hands. David sat down across from her, clearly uncomfortable. Ruth brought him coffee without asking, giving him an encouraging smile. "Catherine showed me your work," Patricia said, deciding to be direct. "Your dissertation research. I want you to know I didn't ask to see it. She sent it to me because she thought it was important, and she was right." David's jaw tightened. "It's not finished." "It's not even close to finished, I know. But what you have is brilliant. The theoretical framework alone is publishable. And from what Catherine tells me, you've actually implemented your theories successfully. That computer lab you built, that's a practical proof of concept that most researchers spend years trying to achieve." "It's just a small school," David said quietly. "It's a working model. It's data. It's validation of your research." Patricia leaned forward. "David, I'm going to be blunt with you. What you've developed could help hundreds of schools, community centers, and libraries across the country, places that have been left behind in the digital age because they can't afford modern technology. Your work shows them how to maximize what they have." David stared into his coffee cup. "I walked away from it. I gave up. You had a reason, a good reason. Taking care of your mother wasn't giving up. It was being human." Patricia's voice softened. "But now you have a choice. You can keep running from this, or you can finish what you started. I don't have funding. I don't have an advisor. I don't even know if Stanford would take me back." "You don't need Stanford," Patricia said. "Our university would be honored to have you. We have a fellowship program specifically for doctoral candidates who've had interruptions in their education. It includes a living stipend, health insurance, and research support. You could finish your degree while continuing to work with schools like Catherine's." David looked up sharply. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me. I know your work, and in academia, that's what matters. Besides, this isn't charity. We need researchers like you. We need people who understand that technology isn't just about innovation for its own sake. It's about access, equity, and making sure everyone has the tools they need to succeed. Ruth appeared with plates of food neither of them had ordered. Sandwiches, soup, pie. On the house, she said firmly. Can't have important conversations on an empty stomach. After she left, Patricia smiled. Catherine told me about Ruth, about how you ended up here. You came into this diner looking for a meal, and instead you found a community that needed you. That says something about you, David. You could have kept driving, but you stopped. You helped. That's not someone who's given up. That's someone who temporarily lost his way. David ate slowly, thinking. The past month had been strange. He'd felt more like himself than he had in a year, working with his hands, solving problems, teaching kids. But he'd also felt the pull of his unfinished research, the ache of abandoned dreams. How long would I have to finish? He asked finally. We could give you a year, maybe 18 months, enough time to complete your dissertation, run additional studies, defend your work. And after that, Patricia smiled. After that, you'd have your doctorate. You could go anywhere, do anything, work for a tech company, start your own consulting firm, continue in academia. The world would be open to you again. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, There's a condition. What's that? I want to keep working with schools. Not just as research, but as real partnerships. I want to train people to do what I did here. Teachers, IT staff, even students. I want to create a model that communities can replicate on their own, without needing an expert to swoop in and save them. Patricia's smile widened. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. And yes, we can make that part of your research program. The news spread through the town quickly. David was going back to school. He was going to finish his degree. He was going to be Dr. Chen. People stopped him on the street to congratulate him. George brought him a framed photo he'd taken of the sunrise over the lake. The students at the school made him a card signed by everyone. Ruth cried when he told her, though she tried to hide it. I'm not sad, she insisted, wiping her eyes with her apron. I'm proud. You came in here with nothing, and look at you now. I came in here hungry, David corrected gently. You fed me. You gave me a place to stay. You gave me a chance when I needed it most. That's not nothing, Ruth, that's everything. The computer lab opened officially on a Monday morning. Catherine held a small ceremony with students, teachers, and parents. Tommy cut the ribbon. The local newspaper sent a reporter who took photos and interviewed David about his work. What made you decide to help our school? The reporter asked. David thought about it. I didn't decide anything, really. I was just hungry and needed a meal. Ruth hired me to organize her storage room. Then her computer broke and I fixed it. One thing led to another. I guess sometimes the best things in life aren't planned. They just happen when you're open to possibilities. The article ran the following week with the headline, Local Tech Genius was here all along. Ruth framed it and hung it on the diner wall, right next to the register where everyone could see it. David moved to the university town but came back to visit every few weeks. He'd stop at the diner first, always. Ruth would make him whatever he wanted, though more often than not it was the same thing he'd ordered that first night. Coffee and toast. Simple. Honest. A reminder of where he'd been and how far he'd come. 6 months later, David successfully defended his dissertation. Patricia was on his committee, along with 2 other professors who'd reviewed his work. They asked tough questions, pushed him on his methodology, challenged his conclusions, but in the end they all agreed. His research was solid, important, and ready to be shared with the world. Dr. David Chen had offers from 3 different tech companies within a week of graduating. Good offers with impressive salaries, but he chose to stay at the university as a visiting professor. He wanted to teach, to mentor students, and to continue his work with underserved communities. He created a program that sent university students into small towns and rural areas to help schools and libraries optimize their technology. They called it the Digital Bridge Initiative. Within 2 years, it had helped over 50 institutions across 3 states. Tommy enrolled at the university the following fall. He declared his major as computer science and asked David to be his faculty advisor. They worked together on Tommy's first research project, improving on the model David had built at the high school. The diner still displays that newspaper article. Tourists sometimes ask Ruth about it. She tells them the whole story, from beginning to end. About the tired, hungry man who came in one cold November evening. About how he fixed her computer and ended up changing lives. What's the moral of the story? A visitor asked her once. Ruth thought about it while she poured coffee. I guess it's that you never know who's going to walk through your door. Someone might look like they have nothing to offer, but give them a meal and a chance and they might surprise you. They might surprise themselves. She looked at the framed photo George had given David, now hanging beside the article. A sunrise over the lake, all golden light and possibility. Everyone's got something valuable inside them, Ruth said. Sometimes they just need to remember it's there. And sometimes they need someone else to believe in them first, before they can believe in themselves again. David Chen had walked into a small-town diner looking for food. He'd found something much more important. He'd found himself again.